Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Planning an Optimized Content Strategy. My name is Mario Kiriakou, Managing Partner at Ratio. So something about Ratio. Ratio are a UK digital agency. We also have a site called Partner. We help clients to achieve their digital targets and revenue objectives by leveraging data-driven insight and continuous testing and optimization to build experiences which deliver seamlessly across devices and channels. A few ground rules for today. We are going to have some time at the end of today's presentation for questions. If you would like to ask a question, please use the toolbar on the right-hand side of your screen to input your question. If we're unable to answer your question at today's end presentation, we'll get back to you in a couple of days. So a couple of questions before we kick off. Why create content? Why have a strategy for content at all? Shouldn't we be shouting about our products and services? I mean, they're all valid questions, so let's look at them in reverse order. Should you be telling customers about your products and services? The answer is a big yes. It's what you do. It's what defines your business. And let's be honest, it's what brings in the revenue for you to keep the lights on. But unless you're a monopoly, you'll be working in a competitive market. Also throw into that mix that only a percentage of your audience at any given time are going to be in the market for your products or services. So why create content and why have a strategy at all? Put simply, a solid approach to content marketing is a key way to be continuously valuable and relevant to your defined audience so that when they are in the market for your services, they will instinctively think of you. So what is the value of content marketing? Well, there's an enormous lot of different things which are valuable in content marketing. It's almost sometimes hard to articulate all of them, but I think some of the main ones are on screen. So content allows you to build and nurture relationships. As I mentioned before, only a percentage of your audience at any given time are going to be in the market for your service or offering. So how do you build a relationship with that segment, but also the rest of your audience who are not in a position, are not interested in buying something right now? Content allows you to build those relationships, to be relevant and valuable to them over a long period of time. Content marketing gives your brand the opportunity to be front and center. As we said before, if someone is not in the market for your product or service, it doesn't mean that in 6 months, 12 months, 2 years' time, they won't be. So at the time when they are in the market, why will they think of you? Why will they remember you? Content, relevant content, stuff which is useful for them, but also relevant for your business, allows you that opportunity to be front of center in the mind's eye of that consumer, of that individual. So when they are thinking of making a purchase, they will instinctively think of you. And if you are working in a competitive landscape, content allows brands to differentiate their offering. You as a marketer might instinctively know why your company's offerings are much better than the competition. Does your audience know? Content gives you the opportunity to articulate and transfer that internal knowledge, which is something which everyone in the organization probably is quite familiar with, why your product is better, to transfer that knowledge to the end consumer, to articulate why your product is better, why it's different, how it's different, why going with your company is the right choice for this consumer. But creating content, like any marketing activity, takes resources. When you're looking to build a business case for content, it can be good to assess the potential impact which content will have on your individual business. Fortunately, it isn't too tricky to prove the value which content has in driving value across the entire customer lifecycle, from marketing right through to sales. A robust, optimized approach to content marketing has the potential to impact all your channels, from SEO, where and how you rank, from awareness of your company via the potential of increased shareability of content, so using your existing audience to speak to a much larger audience. Increased authority of your company as a thought leader within space. And some of the harder metrics, it has the potential impact in increasing inquiries, lead generation, donations, and revenue. But how do people engage with content? And more importantly, if you're looking to start an optimized content program yourself, it's looking at your own individual business and identifying how your end consumers, your end customers engage with content? What devices do they currently use to engage with your brand? Do you have a desktop site? Do you have a mobile site? Do you use apps? Look at your analytics, determine where the majority of the value is being derived from, because that will help influence where you deploy your resources. Most likely you're not going to have the resources as well as the people to be strong on every single front, so you want to be quite surgical. It's therefore identifying where your customers are engaging with your brand is important, because that will lead to where you deploy your resources. That's not to say if mobile currently is not converting well for your brand, or they're not engaged with it, therefore you shouldn't deploy any resources. It may be an opportunity. For example, you may identify the reason why they're not engaging with mobile is because of a lack of mobile content, the site might not be optimized, etc. So it may highlight an opportunity as well. Some of the problems around content marketing is knowing what type of content to produce. There's an enormous amount of content, and this is just a few examples, from infographics right through to videos, podcasts, newsletters, etc. There's an awful lot. Most likely as an organization, you are already creating content which fits into some of these categories. You might be creating content which is outside of these categories. The point is to understand what content should we create, where should we deploy our resources, should we have an even spread across, for example, all of these different categories, or should we focus on just one or two? I mean, to determine that, you'll look at different areas. You'll look at your analytics, you look at your data to determine if you are producing some of this content already, what does the conversion rates look like? Later on, we'll talk about impact on business metrics. You may want to reverse and work your way backwards from what is driving donations or sign-ups or whatever, and determine the type of content which is influencing that. The point is, you're not likely to be producing, unless you have the resources, 10 or 12 different types of content. You may look to optimize between, say, 3 to 4, and look to just test and build out from there. So what's the difference between creating content and an optimized content strategy? Well, a lot of companies create content. You already do that. It may not be as part of a robust content strategy, but you create content. All organizations are really in the content creation business. It's very difficult to point to a single business which doesn't create content, from a marketing flyer to a product brochure to sales leaflets, etc. You will be creating some forms of content. But if it's not as part of a content strategy, an optimized content strategy, what does that look like? Is it reactive? Are you creating content to support specific campaigns? Have you mapped it to your audience? Have you mapped it to the channels? How do you know if that content is the right type of content? That to me is the difference. An optimized content strategy is in understanding from the consumer's point of view, from your end customer's point of view, what type of content do they need? That's relevant to them, also relevant to them depending on where they are in their interaction with your company. Because content is everywhere, all organizations will be creating content at the moment. It's almost impossible not to be creating content, but the key thing is to getting the most out of content is in how you optimize it. If you get asked why you should invest in content marketing, isn't it just fluffy? Isn't it just a lot of fluff? Many marketers have heard this before. And the truth is it's not fluffy. I think it can be deemed as a fluffy form of marketing because it's not linked to the impact on the business. If you really look at why you are looking to build a robust content marketing plan, is because of that point I made earlier about only a given percentage of your audience are going to be in the market for your product. So how do you build a relationship with the other 99%, for example? Content allows you to own that audience, build that audience, engage with that audience, build a relationship, and also over time optimize. You can then test different types of content, figure out what works, and ultimately measure the conversion, measure the flow from engagement through to hitting your, not just marketing objectives, but your business objectives. How do you increase those donations? How do you increase those membership signups? How do you increase the purchases of your product or inquiries? So a few things to ask yourself. few things to ask yourself. So how do we engage with our audience? So how do you currently engage? What channels do you use? What devices? What technology? What type of content do you use currently to engage with your audience? Do you currently push a sales product message to your customers? Is that what you do? You keep hammering a product message? If so, what does the conversion rates look like? How does that look? What's the feedback from customers? Have you done any sort of insight analysis to determine whether that type of approach works with your audience or resonates? Are you reactive with your content creation? So do you plan out your content creation needs in advance? Do you map it against your customer requirements? Or is it more reactive based on the needs of the business at a given point? And do you look to target the same type of content to your entire audience? Obviously, you'll have different segments, different personas, different demographics you look to target. They might have different content needs. Are you looking to deliver the same type of content, or are you looking to be more hyper-targeted and more relevant for your content? So what are some of the things you should be aware of when looking to optimize your content strategy? Well, we're going to be covering them now. Knowing your audience. It's a universal truth that if you do not know your audience, then it's difficult to know what type of content to create. If you don't know your audience, it's difficult to align the content with their needs, their requirements. Really, if you don't understand what their challenges are and pain points, it's hard to create the content. So know your audience. Work with the wider business to define who that audience is, what they look like, identify the demographics, create personas, look at your analytics to extract insight, run customer interviews, run surveys, build up a profile of who your audience is, because we can use that in the next stage and the latter stages to create relevant content for those specific audiences. Sometimes I say, and I've said in previous presentations, that the traditional funnel is dead. And in many ways it is. We do live in an omni-channel world where people do not travel along a linear journey. They interact with different pieces of content. They jump in, jump out, and that's true. But at the same time, in terms of when you're looking to optimize your content strategy, using the traditional funnel is a good way of overlaying your customer segments against different stages of the journey and determine the different type of content needs that are required at different stages of that journey. This example from Smart Insights is a great example of the Smart Insights, focuses on the inbound marketing funnel. So it's a great way of breaking up that customer journey from the exploration stage. What channels do customers use at that point? What type of content is relevant for them? But if you're mapping it to your audience, if you have, say, 3 or 4 different segments, what are the different content requirements at that stage? Right through to decision making. What type of content do those different segments need to push them over the edge, to make a decision, to go with your service? Right through to advocacy and being a post-customer. Someone who's been a customer of you for a number of years is going to have a completely different set of content requirements to someone who has only just heard about your brand. So it's a good way of overlaying and working on planning out the content approach, figuring out what content you need. So it's a good way to start. Going back to what I said earlier about a lot of businesses here, a lot of marketers hear from people outside of marketing that content is fluff, that it doesn't really drive business. It's not sales, it's not product focused, it's intangible. And yes, I've heard it a lot, and it can be a little bit annoying to hear, because actually content marketing at its very heart is about driving business value. It's highly measurable. Its purpose should be about what value can I deliver to the business, and which is why having not moving away from just creating content to creating an optimized content strategy is key. And one of the key elements is to bake in KPIs into your content plan. And there's 2 elements to consider with this: soft metrics and hard metrics. For a lot of marketers, we measure soft metrics. Why? It's easy. If you're using tools like Google Analytics or social analytics, it's very easy to measure social shares, blog signups, newsletter signups, time on page, dwell time, bounce rates, etc. very easy to measure that, which is why a lot of people do it. Now that's great. What I often hear is we can measure all this, but we don't know what happens next. So we have a video that has 1,000 views, great, really cool, bumper numbers, but what is the impact on the business, on the hard metrics? How does that increase sign-ups, donations, purchases, etc.? Now, the reason I've left hard metrics particularly vague by saying the impact on business is because the specific hard metrics might vary from business to business, and actually will vary from business to business. But the key thing is to work backwards. Look at what are the current hard metrics that you use as a business to determine success, and work backwards. So an example could be, say, a lot of companies do a lot of blogging. So say, for example, you have a successful blog. You may be generating 100 sign-ups a month to your blog, 1,000 a quarter, doesn't matter. Are you measuring what percentage of those sign-ups are then converting to the next stage, to signing up for your product or services, signing up for a trial, buying something, making an inquiry? It's a simple way of linking a soft metric to a hard metric. So how do you define the types of content that Create and Optimize? Well, as I said before, you're most likely not starting from scratch. You would have already created a lot of content yourself. So the question is, what type of content? So look to do a content audit. When auditing your content, audit it against your audience segments and also against the funnel. So what type of content do you have that's relevant for those different audience segments? Also, what type of content do you currently have that matches against those different elements of the funnel? Do you have a lot of content that's great at the awareness stage, just found out about your brand, but don't really have anything for that post-purchase stage? The good thing about auditing your existing content is, A, it allows you to be efficient with what you've got, so you're not reinventing the wheel, but it also allows you to spot the gaps, identify opportunities, but also gives you a chance to optimize what you've got, prove the value to the business before making a case for additional resources to create more content. An analytics review, look at your data. Look at what your current content engagement rates are. Look at the data to extract insight, what works, and also what doesn't work, because that will give you an idea of where to focus your efforts. Industry benchmark. Look at your competitors, look at companies you admire, look at how they are using content to engage with their audience and to engage and build relationships with their audience. Look to see what you can apply or take away as an approach to apply to your own business. Because ultimately, you want to do all three, because the end result is a content strategy which allows you to build those longer term relationships, to nurture the 99% of your audience who are not in a position to purchase or engage with your organization, to build those relationships for the long term. Because content is ultimately about building sticky customer relationships. As I said, it's about building those relationships with the 99%. It's about providing valuable, relevant content at the right time and the right place based on data and insight, and using the tools to seamlessly deliver that content to the audience at the right time. We talked about reactive content, and there's always a place for reactive content based on opportunities and circumstances, and we'll cover that a little bit later on in the presentation. But all your efforts shouldn't be reactive. We prefer to say here at Ratio to focus on creating data-driven content. Well, what do we mean by that? Well, it's about using data and extracting insight to inform your content-making decisions, to figure out where and what you should be producing. So you could look at your data and your analytics to determine you're not converting in a certain area. You'll identify the opportunity. You'll need to investigate to understand why. But the point is, if you then look to create a content or a campaign around that opportunity that you've extracted based on your data, you'll be more data-driven in your content creation, so more surgical. If you have a finite resource for content production, you want to know you're deploying it to the potential best impact for the business. Having a data-driven approach allows you to do that. And we live in the omni-channel world. The opportunity that content gives us is in providing a content glue to feed through different channels. Ultimately, what you would like is to be able to deliver a seamless experience across different channels from web to app to mobile to install, to understand who your audience is and understand what their needs and requirements are, and look to deploy the type of content across those different channels. And how do we look to do that? Well, to move towards profiling your customers, because we talked about earlier about running an exercise to know who your audience is. We talked about mapping your audience against the funnel. That's great. That's something you do offline, but once you start executing and looking to understand which of those segments are interacting with your audience digitally, on your line, on your mobile site or your website, your desktop site, etc. How do you do that? Well, there's different ways. On screen, I'm showing an example from Sitecore. This is their X profile. So it's a really cool piece of technology which allows you to stitch and link the ideas of the strategy of knowing who your audience is, identifying the content you need to create, and actually profiling your customers online. So it allows you to identify your content types on site, which are matched against your specific segments, and to build up individual profiles over time. So you can begin to say, this visitor is from this segment and at this point of their customer journey, they're interested in this type of content, therefore it gives us the opportunity to reserve and retarget relevant content. And that's what we mean by profiling your customers. And it's a pretty cool way we feel of building deeper relationships with your audience. Because ultimately, you want to match content to each visitor. So we look at three different things: audience segments, technology, and automated and personalized. So with audience segments, we want to move to a model where we're treating each segment differently. We acknowledge that customers on their first visit or even their second visit are not in a position to purchase or sign up for our service or make a donation. They will most likely look to return multiple times. And each time they return, they might be engaging with different pieces of content. So do we remember our visitor choices and their preferences? Have we profiled them? Are we looking to carry on that conversation to be more relevant, to make sure we're cutting through the noise to serve relevant content to individual segments? And what type of technology have we put in place to help achieve that? Are we currently using marketing automation tools? Do we use personalization tools? Do we have the right type of analytics in place and actually set up correctly in order to leverage this approach? And automate and personalize. Now, this to me is a tactic. Technology such as marketing automation is a tool. For a lot of people who purchase marketing automation feel once you bought it, you install it, it's going to start automating. It's not. Actually, the technology is completely separate from the tactic. For the tactic to work, in order to successfully leverage marketing automation or personalization, you need a plan, a strategy, and an approach in place to support, to sit on top of it. Ultimately, technology is useless unless there's a driver telling it where to go. But if you've leveraged it successfully, you have a plan in place, automation and personalization allows you the opportunity to be super relevant, to hyper-target individual segments with the right content based on who and what they are and what their needs are. Now, optimizing your content doesn't mean you can't still be agile. Now, we talked earlier on about moving away from being reactive. Now, being reactive is not a bad thing. But there's one takeaway from today's webinar. It's if you look to move away from just creating just purely reactive content to having a robust content marketing optimized strategy in place, is this. If you do have a strategy in place, an optimized approach in place, you can be reactive in the full knowledge and still be agile in the full knowledge that A, you've identified your segments, you've mapped your segments to the marketing funnel, You've identified a type of content that's relevant for individual segments at different stages of their journey. You've looked to create their content, and you've used data to extract insights and discover opportunities. And then you can be really agile. And agile in the sense you can create content that's more surgical, that's in response to an opportunity you've discovered. And the chances are it's more likely to be successful. It might not be, but the point is we've got a robust approach in place to allow us to test and analyze and tweak because we've baked in KPIs into the process. So what are the takeaways from today's session? Well, map out how customers are currently interacting with your content. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. You don't need to start from scratch. You can audit your existing content, map it against your segment, map it against the customer journey, against the funnel, and look to optimize what you've got. Look to build in KPIs. Use that to build a business case for the business to say, look, it really works. It helps us to engage our audience and drive conversions further down the line. Use that as a way of building a business case for the business. Look to move away from being purely reactive in content creation. Content should be mapped against the customer journey. Look to profile your customers in order to serve them better and also to hyper-target segments more relevantly. Use technology to deliver content seamlessly across multiple channels. And for me, one of the most important ones is always look to measure the impact on the business. Always look to identify what those KPIs are and should look like and build them into your plan. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining me on today's webinar. We've got time for a couple of questions. So I'm just going to see what questions have come in. Okay, the first question, where we use Cycle currently, but I don't think we have access to the X profile, or I haven't come across it. That might be true. The X profile that I showed earlier on is available on Cycle version 8 and later. So if you're on an earlier version, then you won't have access to that specific tool. So once you upgrade, you will have access to it. So that might explain that. And the second question, we're a charity. We do a lot of content marketing, but we find it hard to link our own content efforts to an increase in donations. By the way, we also use Cycle. So there's a couple of ways you could look to do that. You could look to work backwards. You could look to take a segment of your data, say maybe a quarter's worth of data on donations. So have a look at, so extract say the last quarter's worth of donations, look at that data and look to backtrack. If you're using something like Cycle, you could use the X profile to identify the type of content that those individuals who ultimately went on to donate engaged with. And then we can aggregate that up to determine which content pieces have influenced the most that donation, or the multiple pieces of content, because it's unlikely to be just one. We live in a world where multiple touch points are driving people to a sell. So that's one way we could do it, the work backwards. In effect, working backwards from the sell, using Cycle to determine the type of content people engage with, and then looking to say, okay, these 3 or 4 pieces have driven an increase in donations. Let's look to optimize or put more resources into creating these types of content. Well, that's the last question for today. So thank you very much. Just to let everyone know that today's session was recorded. We will be sharing the recording and a copy of the slides with everyone on today's webinar. Just let everyone know that we are running another webinar next week titled How to Build an Agile Marketing Team. It's next Wednesday at 2 p.m. So hopefully you could join me again next week. Well, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.